Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to have this opportunity to speak to this because there's a background in Quebec. Quebec media revealed last spring that some journalists had been subject to police wiretapping. Their phone calls were monitored. People were shocked to learn this, and the more you dug into it, the more it became apparent that Patrick Lagacé was one journalist who had been wiretapped, but others had too. So it wasn't just an isolated case and a short period of time. A number of journalists were wiretapped over 4 to 5 months, including Alain Gravel from Enquête. So it was a big problem. And it was widespread and ongoing. So many people were shocked by the news. And after some hesitation, the government of Quebec decided to strike a commission on the protection of journalistic sources. So on November 11th, 2016, that commission was set up. I think it's important to remember that other steps were taken by the National Assembly, including a motion, a unanimous motion, declaring that the protection of sources is a principle that the National Assembly believes in, an important principle. And so the commission was launched, and the Quebec Justice Minister said that the news was serious enough and the public confidence in public institutions was essential. So that's the very principle, the underlying principle. And I think it's important to remember that. We're talking about protecting journalistic sources. It's a matter of public confidence, public trust in our institutions. You have to understand that many scandals have been uncovered by journalists. They do hard work. They rely on sources. If they didn't have anonymous sources, if they couldn't guarantee their sources anonymity, the sources would have never spoken out, and we might never have, those scandals might have never seen the light of day. That's why it's so important. These things have to be revealed to the public. That helps us as a society move forward, to progress. That makes our democracy much more sound and healthy. Without journalists, unfortunately, there might be a lot more wrongdoing that goes unpunished and undetected. So journalists often rely on sources who put themselves at great risk. If their names were known, they would be put at great risk. And we know that police do surveillance, they do wiretapping, but that work has to be carefully limited. The commission I referred to has a mandate to make recommendations on police practices, on the protection of sources, and the ways of doing that. So I think that under that mandate, some interesting things will come out of that commission. And the bill we have before us today covers about 75% of the problem, but I think it will be important to follow up on what is learned from the Quebec experience, what that commission comes up with, so that we can really come full circle, and perhaps some other protections and safeguards will prove necessary. So that's what was going on in Quebec, and you have to understand that given all that background, the federal government was called upon to react. The problem was a serious one, and since the federal government didn't want to launch its own commission of inquiry on the protection of journalistic sources federally, because they said, well, we don't have that problem federally. So I think it's important to react. It was important to do something about the problem. So this bill was tabled in the Senate, S-231, but you have to understand that it's based on previous legislation that was presented 10 years ago. Unfortunately, because of our parliamentary process, which at times is not necessarily very efficient. So 10 years ago, there was an attempt to fix this problem, but because bills die on the order paper with prorogation and so on, the bill never made it all the way through. And in 2007, there was unanimous support already among all political parties to deal with this issue, but unfortunately, it was never done. And then these revelations came out subsequently, and we learned that there was spying on journalists over a period of several years.
It's very unfortunate. However, I want to call attention to the work that Monsieur Ménard did 10 years ago on the matter of protecting journalistic sources. The bill that we currently have, S-231, takes up most of the measures that had been suggested in C-426 10 years ago, but still adding certain other measures that are updated and that are connected to other legislation to ensure that journalistic sources were protected and that those protections are up to date. I would like to explain just how important it is to understand these revelations. Canada, after journalists revealed that they had been spied upon, fell to 22nd place in world rankings for freedom of the press. That was a reduction of 14 spots. That had an extremely negative impact on Canada's image, which was seen to be a country that is relatively free. And yet, sources were being spied upon. What really made me angry was the length of time. We didn't spy on people for a short time because we thought that maybe they were in contact with a few people. It was 4 to 5 years, 4 to 5 years, where people's conversations were being listened to as they spoke to reporters. We had the details of their lives. I think that that does not make any sense at all. We didn't target a certain period. It was basically a broad-ranging attempt to collect information. When we see what happened before, well, the first thing we have to tell ourselves is maybe we should have pushed 10 years ago to solve this problem. Now, it is 10 years later, and really, I think it is essential to pass this bill. It's not going to solve the entire problem, but I think it will solve at least 75% of it. That is why we cannot allow parliamentary procedure to cause us to not act on this issue. It would have been good if the government had presented its own bill to solve this issue. That's not what happened. This is a bill that is a private member's bill. However, I think we can no longer allow ourselves, for Canada's public image, to no longer act on this question. The freedom of the press is a fundamental principle in Canada and Quebec. I think that reporters deserve to know that they can do their work without being spied on, that they can do it freely. I believe that the citizens in Quebec and Canada deserve to know that when they talk to a reporter, they are protected. When we recall that recently in 2013, it was because of a source that there were EI quotas, and that investigators had quotas to meet, money to go get from people who were unemployed. But if the reporter had not done that work, if the source had not been guaranteed their anonymity, we might never have known. And I think that the public good would not have been protected. That is why it is important to protect our sources. Otherwise, people will no longer dare to blow the whistle on certain situations. And when people are afraid to divulge what's going on in certain situations, that leads to consequences where we no longer advance, and democracy is the loser in that situation. Protecting reporter sources is intimately linked to democracy, and I think it is essential to act on this matter now, and I hope we will do it once and for all and not have another 10-year delay.
Reprise de débat.